My name is Brock, 34 years old, and a software engineer who just wanted a normal Sunday dinner with family. Instead, I got the moment that would finally break 20 years of favoritism. When my dad proudly declared my younger brother Troy was the only hard-working one among us, everyone nodded in agreement. They had no idea I had been secretly covering Troy's $3,500 monthly rent for years. One calm statement from me changed everything. Before I tell you how this family drama unfolded, let me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe for more real-life stories. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, shaped more than just my childhood memories. It created the foundation for a family dynamic that would take decades to finally confront. Our modest two-story house on Maple Street was comfortable but never flashy. Dad always made sure we knew the value of a dollar. My father, Martin, built his reputation as the tough but fair foreman at the local manufacturing plant. He worked there for 32 years, climbing from the assembly line to management through sheer determination and grit. His calloused hands and perpetual 5 o'clock shadow became symbols of what he considered real work. My mother, Diana, balanced her part-time nursing career with maintaining our household, her gentle nature often softening Dad's hard edges when necessary. Then there was Troy, my younger brother by 4 years. From the moment he arrived, something changed in our family. Troy inherited Mom's bright blue eyes and Dad's strong jawline, creating a magnetic charm that seemed to pull everyone into his orbit. Athletic, outgoing, and effortlessly popular, Troy became the golden child without even trying. I was different. Quieter, more analytical, preferring books and computers to football games and parties. My brown hair and average build never turned heads like Troy did, but what I lacked in natural charisma, I made up for in determination and intelligence. While Troy collected trophies for sports, I collected academic achievements and scholarships. Yet somehow, these always seemed less impressive to my parents. Troy scored the winning touchdown. Dad would announce to everyone at church or family gatherings, beaming with pride. My perfect SAT scores or coding competition wins would merit a brief Brock is doing well with his computer stuff before the conversation shifted back to Troy. This pattern continued through high school and beyond. I worked tirelessly, graduating top of my class and earning a full scholarship to Carnegie Mellon for computer science. The day of my high school graduation, my parents hosted a backyard barbecue. As relatives congratulated me, Dad pulled everyone's attention to Troy's baseball team making regionals. My achievement became background noise. College wasn't much different. I called home weekly, sharing news about challenging projects or internship offers. Mom would listen politely before asking, "Have you heard from Troy?" He hasn't called in weeks. Troy had dropped out of community college after 3 semesters, claiming it wasn't his scene. Instead of concern, my parents showed understanding. "College isn't for everyone," Dad would say. "Troy's got street smarts." While I was building my career step by careful step, Troy bounced between bartending, sales jobs, and get-rich-quick schemes. Each new venture was met with enthusiastic support from our parents, regardless of how the previous one had failed. "This is the one that will showcase his talents," Mom would insist. Meanwhile, my promotion to senior software engineer at a leading tech company received a distracted, "That's nice, honey." The pattern was crystal clear. Troy could do no wrong, and my achievements would never quite measure up. Not in their eyes. But despite this imbalance, family loyalty ran deep in me. When Troy called 3 years ago, voice uncharacteristically shaky, explaining he'd been evicted from his apartment, I didn't hesitate to help. "Just until I get back on my feet," he promised. "This new sales job is going to be huge." I paid his security deposit and first month's rent on a luxury apartment in Pittsburgh that cost $3,500 monthly. What started as temporary assistance evolved into a standing arrangement. Every month, I transferred the money without complaint, telling myself it was temporary. Troy always had a reason why this month was tight, but next month would be different. It never was. Why did I keep paying? That question haunted me during many sleepless nights. Perhaps I wanted to prove I could succeed enough to carry both of us. Maybe I hoped my parents would finally see my worth if they knew how much I was supporting their favorite son. Or possibly, I simply couldn't bear watching my brother fail, knowing how much it would hurt our parents. Whatever the reason, I kept the arrangement secret. Troy certainly never mentioned it to our parents, preferring they believe he was thriving on his own merits. And I never corrected their assumption that my brother was standing on his own 2 feet while I was just playing with computers. The dynamic was painful but familiar. Until that Sunday dinner changed everything. The week before the infamous Sunday dinner had been particularly successful for me. After 6 months of intense work, my team had finally launched the security protocol that would become the cornerstone of our company's newest platform. The CEO personally sent an email congratulating us, mentioning me by name. My team had celebrated with champagne and an impromptu happy hour. I felt validated professionally in a way that contrasted sharply with my family experience. That same week, I received a frustrated text from Troy. Got let go again. Total BS. Boss had it in for me from day one. This marked his 3rd job loss in 8 months. Each followed the same pattern: initially enthusiastic reports about his amazing new opportunity, then gradual complaints about unfair treatment, culminating in an inevitable termination that was never, according to Troy, his fault. Despite this setback, Troy remained confident. No worries, though. Got something major lined up. Potential 6 figures. The familiar pattern continued, but I had learned not to question his optimism directly. It only led to defensive arguments and accusations that I didn't believe in him. Sunday arrived with perfect spring weather, the Pennsylvania suburbs showcasing their best features. Dogwoods and cherry trees bloomed along the streets of my parents' neighborhood. The familiarity of the drive brought mixed emotions: comfort, mingled with a creeping dread about the inevitable family dynamics waiting for me. I arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, as requested by Mom. Troy's sleek sports car already occupied the driveway, forcing me to park on the street. A small thing, but somehow symbolic of our relationship. As I walked up the path, I noticed Troy had recently upgraded from his previous Audi to an even more expensive BMW. Curious, considering his recent unemployment. Mom greeted me with her usual warm hug and cheek kiss. Brock, we were wondering when you'd get here. Troy's been entertaining us with stories for half an hour already. Dad offered his standard firm handshake from his recliner. Son, how's the computer business? He never remembered the specifics of my job, despite my repeated explanations. Troy lounged on the couch, designer sunglasses pushed up on his head, showcasing what appeared to be a new Rolex watch. He raised his beer in greeting. The coding genius arrives. How's life in the digital mines? I noticed the watch immediately. Nice timepiece. Recent acquisition? Troy grinned, extending his wrist for a better view. Like it? Bonus from the last gig. They might have let me go, but they paid out my commission first. The explanation made little sense. Companies rarely give expensive watches as severance to employees they're firing, but no one questioned it. Mom simply smiled proudly while Dad nodded in approval. Smart negotiating, son, Dad said to Troy. Always get what you're owed. The conversation shifted to neighborhood gossip as Mom bustled around, putting final touches on dinner. Mrs. Lawson's garden was winning awards again. The Petersons were adding a swimming pool. The church was organizing another fundraiser. Through it all, Troy dominated the conversation, with my parents hanging on every word. When Mom mentioned I looked tired, Troy jumped in before I could respond. He's probably been up all night playing those computer games. You still do that, right, bro? I hadn't played video games seriously since college, but correcting him seemed pointless. Just finishing a major project at work. It launched successfully this week. That's nice, honey, Mom said, barely listening. Troy, tell your father about that connection you made with the regional sales director. Troy launched into an elaborate story about impressing a top executive at a charity golf event. The tale grew more impressive with each detail: exclusive club access, celebrity sightings, job offers extended on the spot. I recognized his pattern of embellishment, but kept quiet, sipping my iced tea and nodding at appropriate intervals. The peaceful facade cracked briefly when Troy's phone rang. He glanced at it, frowned, and silenced the call. Everything okay? I asked. Just my landlord, Troy said dismissively. Some mix-up with the rent. I'll sort it out tomorrow. The phone rang again almost immediately. Troy excused himself to take the call in the kitchen, his voice a harsh whisper. I caught fragments. I told you the money's coming. Just a few more days. Always been good for it before. When he returned, his easy smile seemed forced. No one else appeared to notice, but years of watching my brother had made me fluent in his tells. The slight tightness around his eyes, the way he drummed his fingers on his thigh. Troy was worried. Everything okay? Mom asked, arranging a platter of deviled eggs. Perfect, Troy assured her. Just a misunderstanding about an amenity fee. They try to squeeze every penny they can. Mom clucked sympathetically. These landlords today are just terrible. In our day, a handshake meant something. Dad nodded sagely. That's why owning is always better than renting. You should think about buying a place, Troy. The irony of this financial advice to someone who couldn't pay his own rent wasn't lost on me, but I maintained my silence. Years of experience had taught me that challenging the family narrative only cast me as the villain. As Mom called us to the dining room, I felt the familiar tension building in my chest. The beautiful table setting, the careful arrangement of Dad's favorite dishes, the family photos watching from the walls, all elements of a perfect family dinner. Yet beneath the surface, currents of resentment, favoritism, and unspoken truths threatened to pull me under. I took a deep breath and pasted on a smile, not knowing that within the hour, the careful facade we'd all maintained for decades would finally shatter. The Sunday dinner table had looked the same for as long as I could remember. Mom's prized china, used only for special occasions and Sunday gatherings. The embroidered tablecloth she'd received as a wedding gift. Crystal water glasses that caught the afternoon light from the bay window. Everything meticulously arranged, creating the image of the perfect family meal. We took our usual seats, Dad at the head of the table, Mom to his right, Troy across from her, and me at the opposite end from Dad. The physical distance between my father and me seemed appropriate, mirroring the emotional space that had always existed. Mom had outdone herself with the meal, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, homemade rolls, green bean casserole, and a garden salad with vegetables from her backyard garden. The familiar aromas transported me back to childhood Sundays, when family tensions seemed simpler, less calcified. Looks amazing, Mom, I said, genuinely appreciative of her efforts. Diana, you've outdone yourself again, Dad agreed, surveying the spread with satisfaction. Troy immediately launched into a story about a celebrity chef he'd supposedly met at a networking event last month. He said my palate was refined enough to be a food critic. Offered me a job at his restaurant on the spot, but I told him sales is where the real money is. Dad nodded approvingly as he carved the roast. Smart move. Those restaurant jobs are all show, no substance. You need a real career with growth potential. The irony of this statement, given Troy's job-hopping history, made me grip my water glass tighter, but I maintained my neutral expression. This was familiar territory, navigating the alternate reality where Troy's choices were always wise and forward-thinking, regardless of evidence to the contrary. As we began passing dishes around the table, Dad steered the conversation toward his favorite topic, the declining work ethic of today's generation. These new hires at the plant, they want everything handed to them, he complained, spooning gravy over his potatoes. No concept of paying dues or working your way up. First sign of criticism, they're ready to quit. It's that participation trophy mentality, Troy chimed in, always quick to align with Dad's perspective. Everyone thinks they deserve recognition just for showing up. I had to bite my tongue at this, coming from someone who hadn't shown up consistently to any job for more than 6 months. Not like when we were coming up, Dad continued, warming to his theme. We understood the value of hard work, putting in the hours, making sacrifices. Mom nodded along, always his most loyal audience. Martin worked so many double shifts when you boys were little, never complained once. Dad pointed his fork at Troy. This one gets it. Always hustling, always networking, making things happen instead of waiting for opportunities. Troy basked in the praise, straightening his shoulders. Just following your example, Dad. The conversation continued in this vein through the appetizers and into the main course. Troy shared an elaborate tale about his recent job interview with a Fortune 500 company, complete with the CEO personally sitting in and being so impressed, he offered Troy a corner office. "They're creating a special position just for me," Troy explained, helping himself to a second serving of pot roast, Director of Strategic Client Acquisition. "Starting salary would blow your mind." "That's my boy," Dad beamed, clapping Troy on the shoulder. "Always aiming high." "When do you start?" I asked mildly. A flicker of annoyance crossed Troy's face. "Still negotiating details. You know how these things go, contracts, benefits packages. Could be another couple weeks." Mom turned to me with her obligatory interest. "And how are things with your work, Brock? Still at the same company?" The question carried its usual subtle diminishment, as though staying with one employer for 8 years represented a lack of ambition rather than stability and advancement. "Yes, still there. We just launched a major security protocol that—" "Security? Like guards and cameras?" Dad interrupted, his confusion genuine. "No, digital security. Protection against hackers and—" "Speaking of security," Troy interrupted, "my new company has hired former FBI cybersecurity experts. Cutting-edge stuff." And just like that, the conversation was redirected back to Troy's fictional career triumphs. I fell silent, pushing food around my plate and wondering, not for the first time, why I continued to subject myself to these dinners. Dad's voice cut through my thoughts. "The problem with most young people today is they think clicking a mouse is actual work." He gestured with his knife, for emphasis. "They don't understand real labor, the kind that leaves your muscles aching at the end of the day." Troy nodded vigorously. "Exactly. There's no substitute for getting your hands dirty, making real connections with clients face to face." Dad looked around the table, his expression growing more animated. "You know, I was just saying to Bill Thompson yesterday, Troy's the only one who works hard around here. He understands what it takes to make something of himself." The table fell silent for a beat. Then Mom and Troy both nodded, with Troy offering a modest shrug as if to say the praise was excessive but not unwarranted. The casual dismissal of my entire career, my years of education, long hours, promotions, and genuine achievements hung in the air. Something shifted inside me. A lifetime of swallowed responses and suppressed frustrations crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. My pulse remained steady, my breathing calm. This wasn't a hot flash of anger, but a cool revelation. I was done enabling this family fiction. I set down my fork deliberately, making eye contact with my father across the table. If Troy works so hard, then I suppose he won't need the $3,500 I transfer to his account every month to cover his rent. For the past 3 years, the words emerged calmly, almost conversationally. Their effect, however, was immediate and dramatic. Troy, who had been mid-sip of his wine, choked and sputtered, red liquid dribbling down his chin onto his pristine white shirt. Mom's eyes widened in shock. "Troy?" she whispered, the single word carrying decades of maternal concern and confusion. Dad froze, fork suspended halfway to his mouth, his expression cycling rapidly through disbelief, confusion, and the first stirrings of anger. The perfect Sunday dinner tableau shattered in an instant, replaced by a tableau of family secrets exposed to unforgiving light. For 3 heartbeats, the dining room remained suspended in perfect silence. The only sound was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, marking the seconds between the old family dynamic and whatever would emerge from this revelation. Troy recovered first, wiping wine from his chin with a cloth napkin. "Brock is exaggerating," he said with a forced laugh. "He helped me out once or twice when things were tight. Making it sound like a regular thing is pretty dramatic, bro." I maintained eye contact with my father, whose complexion had darkened to a concerning shade of red, every month for 3 years. The 5th of each month, $3,500, transferred directly to your account, including this month, 5 days ago. "What exactly are you saying?" Dad demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Troy jumped in before I could respond. "It's a temporary arrangement, just until my new position starts. Brock offered to help. I have the bank records on my phone," I said, still eerily calm. "Every transfer, every month. I can show you right now." That won't be necessary, Mom interjected, hands fluttering nervously over the table settings. I'm sure there's a simple explanation. Troy, honey. There is no explanation, Troy snapped, his charming facade cracking. Brock is trying to embarrass me in front of you guys because he's always been jealous of our relationship. Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the china jump. Enough. I want answers, not accusations. Troy, is what your brother's saying true? Troy's expression cycled rapidly through several emotions: indignation, calculation, and finally a version of contrition that I recognized as completely manufactured. Dad, you know how tough the job market has been. I've had some temporary setbacks, and Brock offered to help until I got back on my feet. It's what brothers do. 3 years isn't temporary, I said quietly. And you live in a luxury apartment with a doorman and rooftop pool. There are more affordable options if you're struggling financially. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Troy, why didn't you tell us you were having problems? We could have helped. Because I wasn't having problems. Troy's voice rose. I was between opportunities. Brock makes it sound like I'm some kind of freeloader. Tell them about your fancy software job, Brock. Tell them about your stock options and bonuses while you're throwing me under the bus. Dad turned to me, confusion evident in his expression. You can afford to just give away that kind of money every month? The question revealed so much about how little my father understood my life or career. Yes, Dad, I can. My computer job pays very well. I'm a senior software engineer specializing in cybersecurity protocols. Companies pay a premium for that expertise. And apparently so does Troy, I continued, turning to my brother. What about the Rolex, the new BMW outside? If you can't afford rent, where is the money coming from for luxury watches and cars? Troy's face flushed with anger. That's none of your business. It is if you're using the money I give you for essentials to buy status symbols, I replied. Dad's expression darkened further. Are you saying you've been lying to us, Troy? About your jobs, your finances, everything? Troy stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated. Brock dumps this on everyone at dinner because he's always resented me. Always been the jealous brother who couldn't stand that you and Mom are proud of me. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and slid it across the table. Here's the evidence. Every transfer, every month. I'm not doing this to hurt anyone. I'm doing it because I'm tired of the fiction that I don't work hard while Troy does. Dad picked up the phone with obvious reluctance, scrolling through the long list of identical transactions. His expression grew more troubled with each flick of his thumb. Mom leaned over to look, her hand covering her mouth in shock. Troy, she whispered. All this time? Troy paced the dining room, running his hands through his hair. Fine. Yes, Brock has been helping with rent. So what? I've had some setbacks. The economy's been brutal. My skill set is specialized. Your skill set, I said quietly, is charming people until they see through you. It worked on our parents for 30 years. It worked on me for 3. But I'm done. Troy whirled to face me. What's that supposed to mean? It means no more money, I stated firmly. Starting now, you need to stand on your own feet or downsize to something you can actually afford. The panic that flashed across Troy's face was genuine. You can't just cut me off. My lease, my obligations, are not my responsibility, I finished for him. Never were. Troy turned to our parents, his expression morphing into one I recognized from childhood, the look that had gotten him out of countless punishments and responsibilities. Mom, Dad, you see what he's doing, right? Ambushing everyone, making me look bad. Dad raised his hand, silencing Troy mid-sentence. His expression had shifted from anger to a profound weariness. Stop. Just stop. He looked between us, seeming suddenly older than his 65 years. All this time, we thought. You thought what you wanted to think, I said gently. That Troy was successful because of his personality and charm. That my career was somehow less valuable because it involves technology you don't understand. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. But why didn't you tell us you were helping him, Brock? Why keep it secret? Because Troy asked me to, I replied simply, and because I knew how it would make him look. Despite everything, he's still my brother. Troy snorted derisively. Some brother, throwing me to the wolves the minute it becomes inconvenient. 3 years isn't the minute, I countered, and $3,500 a month isn't pocket change. The calculation was visible on everyone's face, over $120,000 over 3 years. The room fell silent again as the magnitude sank in. Troy snatched his keys from the side table. I don't need this. Or any of you. He stormed toward the front door, pausing only to deliver a final verbal jab. Enjoy your little moment of superiority, Brock. It's clearly what you've always wanted. The door slammed with enough force to rattle the family photos on the wall. Through the dining room window, I watched Troy peel out of the driveway in his BMW, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his cologne and the shattered remains of our family's Sunday dinner. The house felt unnaturally quiet after Troy's dramatic exit. The pot roast grew cold on the table, the perfect family dinner abandoned. Mom stared at the empty doorway as though expecting Troy to return, apologetic and reasonable. Dad sat heavily in his chair, looking deflated. I remained in my seat, experiencing a strange mixture of relief and regret. The truth was finally out, but at what cost? The silence stretched uncomfortably until Dad cleared his throat. You should have told us. His voice carried accusation rather than gratitude. Keeping something like this secret. It wasn't right. The criticism stung, though it wasn't unexpected. Even now, with evidence of Troy's deception spread across my phone screen, I was somehow in the wrong. Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. Or would you have assumed I was exaggerating to make Troy look bad? Mom began gathering plates, her movements jerky and agitated. We always listened to you, Brock. You didn't give us a chance. I've tried talking about Troy's behavior for years, I reminded her gently. Every time, the conversation gets redirected, or I'm told I'm being too hard on him. Dad pushed back from the table, his chair legs scraping harshly against the floor. This isn't about ancient history. This is about you letting your brother dig himself into a financial hole instead of coming to us. The familiar pattern was reasserting itself, my actions under scrutiny, while Troy's remained beyond criticism. I took a deep breath, determined to break the cycle. Dad, Troy is 30 years old. He's not a child who needs protection from consequences. He chose a lifestyle he couldn't afford and manipulated me into subsidizing it. That stops now. So you're just cutting him off? After dangling him out to dry in front of us? Dad's voice rose. That's how you handle family matters? The unfairness of this characterization made my chest tighten. I didn't dangle him out to dry. I stated a fact in response to your claim that Troy is the only hard-working member of this family. A claim that is demonstrably untrue. Dad waved his hand dismissively. You know what I meant. Troy works with people, makes connections, real-world skills. And I don't? I stood now, my patience finally exhausted. My career requires intense problem-solving, collaboration with international teams, and the ability to anticipate threats most people can't even comprehend. Just because you don't understand what I do doesn't make it less valuable or demanding. Mom returned from the kitchen, wringing her hands. Please stop arguing. This isn't helping anyone. You're right, I agreed, gathering my phone and jacket. Which is why I'm leaving. I think we all need time to process. Running away won't solve this, Dad said, his tone shifting from anger to something closer to concern. Neither will pretending it didn't happen, I countered. Troy has been lying to both of you for years about his financial situation. He's been using my money to maintain a facade of success. Those are facts that won't disappear if we ignore them. I moved toward the door, pausing only to kiss Mom's cheek. I love you both, but I can't keep participating in the family fiction that Troy is perfect and I'm somehow lacking. Mom caught my arm, her eyes pleading. Brock, wait. Your father didn't mean... He did, I said gently. He always does. That's the problem. Troy scored the winning touchdown. Dad would announce to everyone at church or family gatherings, beaming with pride. My perfect SAT scores or coding competition wins would merit a brief Brock is doing well with his computer stuff before the conversation shifted back to Troy. I'll call you tomorrow, I promised Mom, extracting myself from her grip. after everyone's had a chance to calm down. The drive home felt surreal. Spring sunshine illuminated the suburbs in golden light that seemed at odds with the emotional storm I'd just weathered. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Troy alternating between angry accusations and desperate pleas. "How could you ambush me like that? My landlord is threatening eviction. You know I'll pay you back when my new job starts. Answer your phone." I silenced the notifications, needing space to process my own feelings. The relief of finally speaking the truth mingled with anxiety about the family rupture I'd caused. Had I handled it poorly? Should I have continued the charade to keep the peace? No. The realization came with surprising clarity. Enabling Troy wasn't helping him. It was merely postponing his inevitable reckoning with reality. And subjecting myself to continued dismissal of my own worth was a form of self-betrayal I could no longer accept. Dad remained silent, his expression unreadable. Decades of family dynamics hung in the air between us, too complex to untangle in one explosive afternoon. My apartment felt like a sanctuary after the emotional battlefield of my parents' house. Clean lines, modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A space that reflected my actual success, not borrowed status symbols or exaggerated claims. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sank onto the couch, feeling strangely at peace despite the family chaos. The first night after my revelation brought the best sleep I'd had in years. No middle-of-the-night anxiety about Troy's next financial emergency. No simmering resentment about my parents' persistent favoritism. Just the quiet certainty that I'd finally stood up for my own truth. Morning brought a flood of missed calls and texts. Mom pleading for reconciliation. Dad demanding we sort this out like men. Troy alternating between threats and bargaining. I responded only to Mom, promising again to call later when emotions had cooled. Work provided welcome structure and distraction. Amid the flood of Monday meetings and development challenges, I could almost forget the family drama until Troy appeared unannounced at my office lobby at lunchtime. Security called up, and I reluctantly agreed to meet him in the building's cafe. He looked disheveled, his usual polished appearance fraying at the edges. The designer clothes couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes, or the anxious tapping of his fingers against the table. "You've ruined everything," he hissed as soon as I sat down. Dad's been calling me non-stop, demanding explanations. Mom's crying. "Are you happy now?" "This isn't about making anyone unhappy," I replied evenly. "It's about honesty. Something that's been missing from our family dynamic for too long." Troy leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Listen, my landlord is serious about eviction. I need this month's payment, and then we can talk about changing our arrangement." The familiar manipulation attempt was so transparent it almost made me laugh. "There's no more arrangement, Troy. I'm done. You can't just cut me off without warning." His voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. "I've been warning you for months that this situation wasn't sustainable," I reminded him. "You chose not to listen." Troy's expression shifted, anger giving way to the charming persuasiveness that had served him so well. "Brock, come on. We're brothers. Family helps family. I've hit a rough patch, but this new job is going to change everything." "Is there actually a new job?" I asked directly. His hesitation told me everything. "There are several promising leads," he hedged. "Then pursue those leads from an apartment you can actually afford," I suggested. "There are plenty of decent places for half what you're paying now." "You expect me to live in some dump?" Troy looked genuinely appalled by the suggestion. "What would that say about my professional standing?" "It would say, you're living within your means," I replied. "Something most adults manage to do." Troy's charm evaporated, replaced by cold anger. "You've always been jealous. Always resented that people actually like me, while you hide behind your computers. This is your petty revenge." I stood, gathering my things. "Think what you want. The money stops now. How you handle that reality is up to you." As I walked away, Troy called after me. "Dad's coming to your place tonight. He thinks we can work this out." I paused, turning back. "Did he suggest you get a job and pay your own rent? Or is his solution for me to keep bankrolling your lifestyle?" Troy's silence was answer enough. Some patterns were harder to break than others, but I was determined that mine, the pattern of enablement and self-diminishment, ended now. The knock at my apartment door came at precisely 7 o'clock that evening. Dad stood in the hallway, looking uncomfortable in the upscale building. His work jacket seemed out of place against the modern decor, a visual reminder of our different worlds. "Your doorman almost didn't let me up," he said by way of greeting. "Had to show ID and everything." "Security is thorough here," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. "Can I get you something to drink? Coffee? Beer?" Dad surveyed my apartment with poorly concealed surprise. The open floor plan, high-end kitchen, and view of the city skyline clearly exceeded his expectations of what my computer job could provide. "Beer, if you have it," he finally answered, settling awkwardly on the edge of my leather sofa. I brought 2 bottles from the refrigerator, using the moment to gather my thoughts. This conversation had been 30 years in the making, and I was determined to remain calm but firm. "Nice place," Dad acknowledged, taking a long sip of his beer. "Must cost a fortune." "I can afford it," I said simply. "My career has been good to me." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Dad cleared his throat. "Your mother's upset, crying all day." The implied accusation was clear. I had caused this family disruption. "I'm sorry she's hurting," I replied genuinely. "That wasn't my intention." "What exactly was your intention, Brock?" Dad set his beer down with more force than necessary. "Humiliating your brother in front of the family? Making yourself look like the responsible one?" The familiar dynamic threatened to reassert itself. Troy the victim, me the aggressor. I took a deep breath before responding. My intention was to finally address the truth about our family dynamic. "You claimed Troy was the only hard-working one among us. That wasn't true, and I was tired of pretending it was." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "It was just a comment, not some grand statement about your worth." "It wasn't just a comment," I countered. "It was the culmination of a lifetime of similar comments. Troy's achievements celebrated while mine are minimized or ignored." "That's not fair," Dad protested, though with less conviction than I expected. "We've always supported both of you." "Have you?" I asked quietly. "When's the last time you asked about my work, not just how's the computer job, but actually tried to understand what I do or what I've accomplished?" Dad opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, realization dawning in his eyes. "Meanwhile," I continued, "Troy's every job interview and networking event is treated like breaking news. Even his failures are reframed as someone else's fault or a strategic career move." Dad stared into his beer bottle, avoiding my gaze. "We've been harder on you because you've always been the capable one. You didn't need the extra encouragement." The admission stunned me momentarily. So I was punished for being responsible, while Troy was rewarded for struggling? "Not punished," Dad objected. "Just. We knew you'd be fine no matter what. Troy needed more support. And look where that's gotten him," I said, gesturing toward the window. 30 years old and unable to pay his own rent, lying about jobs and success. Dad's expression hardened. "He's going through a rough patch. It happens. It's not a patch if it's his permanent state," I pointed out. "And continuing to protect him from consequences isn't helping him grow up." "So your solution is to cut him off completely?" Dad challenged. "Leave him homeless?" "My solution is to stop enabling behavior that keeps him dependent and immature," I clarified. "Troy has options. He can get a job, a real job, not the fantasy executive positions he invents. He can move to an apartment within his means. He can ask his parents for help instead of hiding his situation from you while taking my money." Dad fell silent, the truth of my words seemingly sinking in. When he spoke again, his voice carried less certainty. He said, "You promised to help him until he got back on his feet." "That was 3 years ago," I reminded him. "At what point do we acknowledge he's choosing not to stand up?" The conversation continued for hours, circling through family history, misunderstandings, and deeply entrenched patterns. Dad's perspective began to shift, not dramatically, but perceptibly. By the time he left, sometime after midnight, there was a tentative bridge forming between our different realities. "I can't promise your mother will see things your way," he warned at the door. "She's always been protective of Troy." "I'm not asking anyone to take sides," I assured him. just to see the whole picture, not just the parts that fit the family narrative. Dad nodded, looking tired but thoughtful. "For what it's worth," he said gruffly, "whatever you do with computers, you must be damn good at it." Coming from him, it was high praise indeed. The next day brought a tearful phone call from Mom, oscillating between demands that I continue helping Troy and recognition that the situation couldn't continue as it had been. "He says he'll be evicted by the end of the month," she fretted. "He has nowhere to go." "He can move back home temporarily," I suggested, "or find a roommate situation. There are options that don't involve me paying for a luxury apartment he can't afford." "But he says this new job—" "Mom," I interrupted gently, "has Troy ever followed through on these promised job opportunities?" Her silence spoke volumes. "He just needs more time," she finally said, but her tone lacked conviction. "What he needs is to face reality," I countered, "something we've all been protecting him from for too long." By midweek, Troy's landlord had somehow obtained my phone number, calling to inquire about the family emergency that had delayed payment. The conversation revealed more of Troy's deceptions. He had apparently told the management company I was a guarantor on his lease, something I had never agreed to. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," I informed the property manager. "I've helped my brother with rent in the past, but I'm not legally responsible for his lease obligations." "That's not what Mr. Harris indicated," the manager replied, confusion evident in his tone. "He said you were handling all financial matters while he focused on his executive position." The fiction Troy had constructed was both impressive and disturbing in its elaborateness. "I'm sorry you were misled," I said firmly. "But any arrangements between my brother and myself were informal and have now concluded." After several similar calls from creditors Troy had apparently directed to me, I agreed to meet with him one final time. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near my office, neutral territory for what promised to be a difficult conversation. Troy arrived looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. The designer clothes remained, but they appeared slept in. His usual meticulous grooming had given way to stubble and unkempt hair. "You've destroyed my life," he opened, sliding into the chair across from me. "Happy now?" "Your life isn't destroyed," I replied calmly. "It's just no longer artificially supported. There's a difference." Troy leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "My landlord's giving me until the end of the week. My car payment is overdue. My credit cards are maxed out. What am I supposed to do?" "Get a job," I suggested. "Any job, even if it's not the executive fantasy you've been selling everyone. Live somewhere you can actually afford. Create a budget and stick to it. Basic adult responsibilities, Troy." His expression cycled through anger, disbelief, and finally, a calculated vulnerability. "I need help, Brock. I'm asking my brother for help." "I'm willing to help," I clarified, "just not financially. I can connect you with recruiters who might find you appropriate positions. I can help you create a realistic budget. I can even help you look for affordable housing." Troy's facade cracked entirely. "I don't need your patronizing guidance. I need money to keep my life from imploding while I sort things out." "That's exactly what you've been saying for 3 years," I reminded him. "Nothing changes because there's no incentive to change. As long as our parents, whoever cushions you from consequences, you'll keep making the same choices." Troy stood abruptly, nearly toppling his untouched coffee. "You think you're so superior with your fancy apartment and big salary. You've always judged me. Always thought you were better." "I don't think I'm better than you," I said truthfully. "I just made different choices that led to financial stability and independence." "Whatever helps you sleep at night," Troy spat, storming toward the exit. "Don't expect to be welcome at Mom and Dad's anymore. You've made your choice." Despite his dramatic proclamation, Mom called that evening to invite me to dinner the following Sunday. "Just the 3 of us," she clarified. "Troy's taking some time to figure things out." The week concluded with an unexpected development. Troy's landlord called again, this time with a different tone. "Your brother has agreed to vacate the apartment by month end," he informed me. "He's requested the security deposit be returned directly to you as partial repayment." The gesture, small though it was, suggested a possible shift in Troy's perspective. Maybe, just maybe, Reality was finally breaking through the carefully constructed fiction he'd maintained for so long. When Sunday arrived, I drove to my parents' house with mixed emotions. Hope for a new family dynamic, tempered by the knowledge that deep-seated patterns rarely change overnight. Dad greeted me with an awkward shoulder pat that, from him, was practically a bear hug. Mom hugged me tightly, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. The dining table, set for 3 instead of the usual 4, symbolized both absence and possibility. As we settled into our seats, Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Your brother's found a studio apartment across town," he announced. "Starting a job at Wilson's Hardware next week. Nothing fancy, but it's a start." The simple statement carried layers of meaning: acknowledgement of Troy's actual situation, recognition that modest beginnings were valid, maybe even a subtle validation of my stance. "That's good to hear," I replied, accepting the bowl of mashed potatoes Mom passed my way. A fresh start might be exactly what he needs. The conversation that followed wasn't easy. Years of family dynamics don't transform in a single week. But for the first time in memory, we spoke honestly about expectations, favoritism, and the complicated love that had simultaneously supported and hindered both Troy and me in different ways. It wasn't resolution that would take much longer, but it was a beginning, a family dinner built on truth rather than comfortable fiction. And for now, that was enough. 6 months can change more than just seasons. As summer faded into autumn, then winter, the transformation in my family dynamic proved both more profound and more nuanced than I could have anticipated that fateful Sunday. The most visible change was in Troy. His new studio apartment, modest but clean, represented more than just downsized living space. It reflected a gradual acceptance of reality over fantasy, substance over appearance. The entry-level position at Wilson's Hardware had evolved into assistant manager after 3 months of consistent performance, not the executive title he once fabricated, but a legitimate achievement he'd earned through actual effort. "The owner says I have a knack for customer service," Troy told me during one of our now monthly coffee meetings. "Says I could manage my own store eventually if I stick with it." The hint of genuine pride in his voice was new satisfaction derived from earned recognition rather than charm and deception. He'd even started community college courses in business management, attending night classes after work shifts. "It's basic stuff," he'd explained with uncharacteristic humility, "but I figure I should understand the fundamentals if I want to move up." Troy still struggled with financial management. Old habits of impulse purchases and status seeking hadn't disappeared entirely, but he'd accepted my help in creating a realistic budget and, more surprisingly, mostly adhered to it. The designer clothes gradually gave way to more practical options. The luxury car was sold and replaced with a used but reliable sedan. "Less impressive at stoplights," he'd joked, "but it doesn't give me a panic attack when the payment comes due." Our relationship remained complicated brothers, navigating a new terrain after decades of established patterns. Some conversations still ended in defensive posturing or old resentments surfacing, but increasingly, we found common ground as adults rather than competitors for parental approval. The changes with our parents evolved more gradually. Mom initially maintained divided loyalty, defending Troy's past behavior while cautiously acknowledging my perspective. Dad's transformation proved more surprising. His lifetime of valuing traditional work had slowly expanded to include appreciation for different types of contribution and success. "Read an article about cybersecurity last week," he mentioned during a phone call. "Made me think of your work. Pretty complex stuff." Such comments, small but meaningful, represented seismic shifts in our relationship. After decades of dismissing my career as playing with computers, Dad had begun making genuine efforts to understand my world. The real test came 6 months after the confrontation when Mom organized another Sunday dinner, this time with all 4 of us present. I arrived with the familiar mixture of hope and anxiety, unsure whether old patterns would reassert themselves in the traditional family setting. Troy arrived shortly after me, carrying a homemade apple pie. "Manager taught me the recipe," he explained somewhat self-consciously. "Thought Mom might like it." The gesture's genuine simplicity, bringing something he'd actually made rather than an expensive store-bought item he couldn't afford, struck me as profound progress. Dinner began awkwardly. everyone hyper-aware of avoiding topics that might trigger old dynamics. But gradually, the conversation found a more authentic rhythm. Mom shared news about her garden club. Dad discussed retirement possibilities. Troy talked about his courses and work challenges without embellishment or grandiose claims. When my turn came, I shared details about a new security protocol I was developing. To my surprise, everyone listened with genuine interest. Dad asked relevant questions. Mom remarked on my obvious expertise. Troy even suggested a potential application I hadn't considered. "You always were the smart one," he acknowledged without the bitter edge that would have accompanied such a statement in the past. "Different kinds of intelligence," I countered. "Your people skills are something I've never mastered." The exchange, simple but honest, exemplified our evolving dynamic, acknowledging differences without hierarchical judgment. After dessert, Dad cleared his throat in the way that always signaled a prepared statement. "I've been doing some thinking these past months," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "about how I've treated you boys differently over the years." The room grew quiet, the only sound the ticking of Mom's kitchen clock. "I always figured Brock would be fine without much fanfare," Dad continued. "He was always so capable, so self-sufficient, and Troy seemed to need more encouragement, more support." He looked between us, his weathered face solemn. "I didn't realize I was teaching one son that his achievements didn't merit recognition, and the other that he didn't need to earn it. Neither of those was right." The simple acknowledgement, free from excuses or deflection, felt like a key turning in a long-locked door. Mom reached across to squeeze Dad's hand, her own eyes damp with recognition. "We're not perfect parents," she added softly, "but we're trying to learn too." That evening marked not an ending, but a new beginning. A family slowly rebuilding on foundations of honesty rather than comfortable illusions. The process wasn't always smooth. Old habits sometimes resurfaced in moments of stress or conflict. But the trajectory remained hopeful. For me, the experience brought unexpected personal growth beyond family relationships, standing up for my truth that Sunday had rippled outward into other areas of my life. At work, I began speaking up more in meetings, advocating for my ideas rather than letting more assertive colleagues claim credit. In friendships, I established clearer boundaries, no longer automatically assuming the supportive role without reciprocation. Most significantly, I learned that speaking truth didn't necessarily destroy relationships. Sometimes it transformed them into something healthier, more authentic. The family fantasy I'd feared shattering had already been fractured by its own contradictions. Truth, however uncomfortable initially, provided the only viable foundation for genuine connection. Troy's journey proved equally instructive. Without the safety net of my financial support and our parents' unwavering approval, he'd been forced to develop authentic competence and self-sufficiency. The process was painful but ultimately more rewarding than the hollow validation he'd previously chased. "I sleep better," he confessed during one of our conversations. "Even though I have less, I worry less." Weird, right? Not weird at all. Living within reality, however modest, brings a peace that fiction, however grand, never can. As winter gave way to spring, our family continued this careful, imperfect reconstruction. The Sunday dinners resumed their regular schedule, now with new traditions, honest conversations, shared responsibilities, and recognition of each person's actual contributions rather than projected ideals. The transformation wasn't magical or complete. Troy still occasionally slipped into exaggeration when describing future prospects. Mom sometimes defaulted to protective coddling. Dad's understanding of my career remained limited by his frame of reference, and I still battled the ingrained tendency to minimize my own needs and achievements. But the direction was clear toward greater authenticity, mutual respect, and balanced relationships. The painful confrontation that Sunday had been not an ending but a beginning, the necessary disruption of patterns too rigid to bend without breaking. If you're caught in similar family dynamics, trapped in assigned roles that no longer fit, enabling behaviors that harm rather than help, or silencing your truth to maintain a fragile peace, I hope my story offers some encouragement. Speaking your truth may cause temporary disruption, but the alternative is permanent disconnection from your authentic self and from the possibility of genuine relationship with others. Have you ever had to choose between comfortable fiction and difficult truth in your family? What was the outcome? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need permission to speak their own truth today. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, family healing begins with honesty, however uncomfortable the initial conversation might be.